Hello, everyone. It is the time of the year again when we at Checkly celebrate launch week. And what we want to do here in this week, so the next 4 days, Monday till Thursdays, we want to share with you what we have been working on over the last few months. But before we get started, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we want you to be part of this session here. And I always love it to see a lot of flags in the chat when we're doing these kind of things. So if you want to participate, please just paste your questions into the chat, and we try to answer them in line as quickly as possible. And yeah, where you're watching from, I would love to see that. And yeah, I think with that, we are already good to go to celebrate this week's launch week. In case you tune in and you haven't heard of Checkly yet, so we at Checkly, we provide you with a platform that gives you synthetic monitoring at scale, which means we provide you two kind of check types that you can run on a schedule. You can check your APIs if they are fast enough, if they are running smoothly, or you can control headless Chrome with Playwright to make sure that your websites and apps are behaving properly. And if something is not right, we can alert you and can let you know that something is off before your customers hit support. And we had a huge and major milestone last week. We have been running 5 billion check runs since Checkly existence. And this means that we ran 4.5 billion API checks and 0.5 billion browser checks. This is 9 zeros, people. So I think this is already a huge number, and we're looking forward to the next 5 billions coming hopefully very soon. And during this launch week, we have a full bag of cool things that we've been working on. Tomorrow, we will have a look at our native Playwright test support. So if you're not a Playwright fan yet, you might want to tune in this one. On Wednesday, we will look at our new public dashboards and our new analytics API that allows you to plug in Checkly result data into your own infrastructure or build public dashboards to be transparent and give information about the healthiness of your platform using dashboards. And on Thursday, we're going to tell you how we run our company, Checkly, in terms of security and in terms of SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. But this is just the future. Today, we actually want to talk about how we see the future of Checkly and how we want you all to establish new monitoring as code workflows. So going forward, we will release some new fancy things here right now. We want you to code, test, and deploy your entire monitoring setup right from your preferred development environment. And to celebrate our new monitoring as code workflows, we also kick off here right now a home office makeover giveaway. So what you can win or what you can get from us is a $500 home office makeover. Let it be the headphones that you always wanted, this way too expensive chair that is good for your back that you never ordered, or a new keyboard. It is up to you. But all that we want from you is that you have a look at our new Checkly CLI and the new workflow that comes with it, and provide us feedback, and then add a little GitHub badge to the project of your choosing, and then we will pick a winner and buy something fancy. But so far, you don't know what monitoring as code is all about. So let's dive right into the session and get a little bit into the nitty-gritty details of coding, testing, and deploying your monitoring setup. And with that, I want to introduce my first guest here at this launch week, and this is Tim. Tim, how is life? Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, Stefan. Life is good. Glad to be here. Folks, I'm Tim, CTO and co-founder at Checkly. And I've been working, I guess, almost the last 5 years on building the most dev-friendly monitoring solution out there.
That is true. So I joined Checkly like 1 year ago, and I have to say that when I started, I definitely figured out very quickly that we have the infrastructure to monitor API endpoints, that we can control headless Chrome with Playwright, and that everything is actually it is a pretty decent product. So what did we learn over the last 2 years?
And I completely agree. That's a pretty decent product. So, yeah, just to recap it a little, so Checkly, right from the beginning, was fairly code heavy. So, what does that mean? It means that you can, for instance, for our API monitoring product, you can wrap your API checks in setup and teardown scripts. And you use JavaScript for this. This might feel very familiar to folks coming from a unit testing background. So you can do setups with JavaScript and fly in data, fly in NPM packages, all that kind of stuff. We also supported already from the beginning Playwright, and actually we started with Puppeteer. We moved to Playwright later. And when you write a Playwright script, you're writing JavaScript or TypeScript in this case. And what we kind of bumped into, what our users also mentioned, is that, hey, you have a great UI, but writing this code in your UI can become a hassle, specifically if you want to do more checks. And code is code. It kind of needs to live in your code base and in your source control when you want to do reviews on it. So this was kind of a blocker for folks growing the amount of checks that they wanted and working together with their team. So we started looking for solutions, essentially, and we quickly started adopting an infrastructure as code workflow. So we started supporting Terraform, for instance, and later also Pulumi. This works really well. So you define all your checks and all the stuff that comes with that. So this could be alert channels, and you do this in Terraform or Pulumi native configuration or code. Works really good if you are a Terraform shop and you're already on that stack, right?
Yeah.
But then we kind of also noticed, like, hey, can we also just not have an extra tool there? So we looked at GitHub Sync, which is also a feature we have where we can directly, for instance, grab your Playwright scripts from GitHub as you push code to GitHub. But actually, we kept thinking, because we still miss this kind of natural flow for a developer that's in the JavaScript and TypeScript ecosystem. And that's exactly what we've been building the last couple of months.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. When I started using Checkly a year ago, it felt super nice and powerful to just log in and get started. But after playing with it a little bit and setting up my monitoring setup, I also tried Terraform and Pulumi, and I'm like a typical JavaScript hipster developer, right? Setting up Terraform didn't feel as natural to me because I want to npm install something. I want to have something that is not an entire new ecosystem. And while these tools feel great, if you're using them already, for me, it felt a little bit like overkill. And the next thing was that I was looking for a way to structure my monitoring and testing setup right next to my application code, right? I maybe have some front-end components or an endpoint that is a service running somewhere, and I wanted to kind of put things there somehow. So we did all this thinking, right? So what's the new approach that we're now taking?
Well, the new approach is kind of a first, I guess. So we took the things that you just mentioned, right? Like, how do I not introduce a new platform or a new tool from a third party? And how can I lifecycle my monitoring setup together with my application code? So what we did essentially, when we went back to the drawing board and we looked at what are we using the whole day. So this is our own development teams, because we're completely on the TypeScript and JavaScript stack. So we're using Vue in the front end, we're using Node.js in the back end. And essentially what we came up with was two things. So first of all, we needed a CLI, a command line interface. And we wanted to kind of marry two different worlds there. I already mentioned infrastructure as code, which really works really well for a whole bunch of teams. And what we came up with was essentially, and this is kind of a joke, but I keep using it, it's we thought, well, what would happen if you have Jest, the test framework, had a baby with AWS CDK, which is an infrastructure as code framework which works in TypeScript. What would happen if they had a baby? And that's kind of what came out, that baby. So we now have a JavaScript, TypeScript native workflow. You can install it with npm, and it combines those two worlds. So you can now actually code those checks, park them next to your application code, test them out if they work, and then deploy them to Checkly without installing anything else or learning a completely new platform. Stefan, so I'm really excited what we're going to show everyone.
Man, I'm excited too. I think this already describes it beautifully. So yeah, Tim, I think showing is better than telling.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing all that. And I think I will move on and we will get our hands a little bit on some source code. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Cool. With that, we are already entering a live demo section. We are ready for this. And let me introduce you to Chris. Chris, how is life, my friend? And what are you doing at Checkly?
Hi, Stefan. I'm doing great. Thank you. And so, like you said, I'm Chris Lampel. I'm a software engineer here at Checkly. And for the last few months, the team I'm on has been working hard on the new monitoring as code workflow and the Checkly CLI. And I'm really happy with what we came up with. And I'm really excited to be presenting it today with you.
Shall we just get started, huh?
Let's dive right in.
Cool. So you all can follow along. I'm here on my terminal and, well, we're going to do some coding, testing, and deploying. So, Chris, how should I kick it off?
Well, you can get started with our initializer. So you can run npm create at Checkly CLI. And this will go ahead and set up a sample project for us to get started.
All right. All right. Can you walk me through it?
Well, we're setting up an example project and we can just give it a name. And we have two options here. We can set up an advanced project with more check types and more advanced configuration already set up, or we can set up the basic project with the bare minimum that we need to get started. I say we go with the basic project and we can fill it out more as we go along. And here we just install the npm dependencies. So again, this is just a normal JavaScript TypeScript project, and we'll install the dependencies.
And now we are good to go. All right, let me navigate into the project. And what do I have here?
Well, if we run ls, we can see that it's just a standard JavaScript project. We have our package JSON, and we also have a few extra files. So here we have a Checkly config file, and we have a checks directory, which will actually store our checks. And here, if we check out the package JSON, we'll see one dependency that's very important for the monitoring as code, which is the Checkly CLI.
Cool. Yeah, we will have a look at the detailed structure of this new project in just a little bit, but I want to get started here with monitoring as code as quickly as possible. So what should I do next?
Well, we have the CLI already installed, so we can run the npx checkly -- help and see what options are already available. And earlier you were talking about code, test, deploy being the new monitoring as code framework, and we see that here. So we have the test and deploy commands. So those are going to be the two that we're running all of the time. And then there's some extra commands that we'll use to help run the project. But those are the two important ones.
Yeah, I see. So now the state that we have so far is that we have the binary in my node modules folder. And I can imagine that the CLI actually sits on top of our APIs, right? I cannot just go ahead and plug and start monitoring testing because, yeah, well, we have to probably do something else, right?
Exactly. We're going to be running checks on your Checkly account and also deploying our monitoring config to the Checkly account. So we'll actually need to authenticate with the Checkly account before we get started. And we can do that using the command that you have there, but we need to change npm to npx.
Good call, my friend. Let's do it like that. So that opens up a browser, which is in my wrong window here. So let me just go over here. Let's make that a little bit bigger. I'm gonna log in here. So let me log in. And we just logged in. And one thing that I really like about this here is that we right now have a local web server running. And I think that's just a beautiful, nice little nugget of this login flow. So let me close this. And what did just happen?
Well, under the hood, you went through the normal login flow that you're used to for logging in with Checkly, and you can use OAuth or your username and password to log into your account.
Yep.
Under the hood, what the CLI does is it creates an API key on your account, and it will store this on your machine, and will use the API key to authenticate for the later commands that we run.
Can I access this API key now in my own little Checkly account?
Exactly. It's just a normal API key, so we can see it in the Checkly account. And if for any reason you need to revoke the API key, for example, you can just go ahead and do that through the web UI.
I see. But here's a tricky question. When I, for example, want to automate all the stuff that we show a little bit later on, and I want to put it into Circle or GitHub Actions, I cannot spin up a browser. What should I do then?
Exactly. The commands that we have here, the CLI, is going to be very useful from your CI/CD setup as well. But this login flow that we just used won't really work there. And what you can do instead is create a normal API key through the web UI and pass that to the CLI using environment variables. So we have the Checkly account ID environment variable and also a Checkly API key environment variable. And these can be stored as secrets in your CI/CD setup. So we followed the normal flow that you would expect there.
Yeah, everybody's doing it like that, right? I'm pretty used to kind of storing secrets in these CI/CD providers. Cool. So now we are authorized and we are ready to play with the Checkly CLI. I want to see some stuff running. What should I do?
Let's go for it. Well, the workflow is code, test, deploy. We already have the code part taken care of with the example project that we just downloaded. And now we can move on to test. So if you just run the Checkly test command, we can get started. And Tim talked about the new Myring as Code workflow being as if Jest and AWS CDK or Terraform had a baby. This is the Jest part of that. So this is what you would expect from a unit testing framework here.
Yeah, so I see already two checks here. So one is an API check and one is a spec file. Can we have a look at these?
Yeah, we can go ahead and open them up.
All right.
So this is it. This is where we define the check as code. And here we're creating an API check. And we see all of the examples or all of the options that you're already used to from creating a check through the web UI. But here we have the advantages of defining it as code.
Yeah, and there's also another one, right? So I think this looks very familiar to me for my Checkly API monitoring. I go in, I tick some boxes, fill out some forms, define everything, right? This is the JSON representation of this. But here's also a browser check file, right?
Mm-hmm. So any users of Playwright that are watching, this will look familiar to them. This is just a normal Playwright test. And what the CLI is doing is it's automatically detecting this Playwright test and converting it into a browser check. So we don't need any more boilerplate to get started. We can just automatically convert our Playwright tests into browser checks and run them using the CLI.
Yeah, I can totally see how this can be very beneficial for a person that already has a Playwright test set up, right? Just plug in the CLI and run it around the planet. But here's a question. So from this whole monitoring as code workflow perspective, when would I use Checkly test?
So Checkly tests will be useful for just running your checks once to make sure that they're all green. So this can be very useful when you're actually developing your checks. So when you're adding a new one or making changes to it, you want to make sure that it's actually passing. So this is useful to run locally. And you can also have this set up as part of your CI/CD. So you can have it run on new PRs to make sure that all of your checks are passing before you actually go ahead and deploy them to your Checkly account and have them attached to alerting.
Yeah, so the idea would pretty much to put things into your CI/CD pipeline, right? Have a preview environment, then point your API checks, your browser checks to the new preview environment, and make sure. So we're here in the testing part, actually. Make sure that everything works. And I just broke our API check. And man, I love a good amount of color, right? And beautiful CL output. So I think you did a very, very good job here.
Thanks. I like the color too. And we tried to put the information that you need there to quickly and easily debug your failing checks.
Yeah, for sure. So now what we achieved is we got in some source code. So we have the code part done. We showed a very quick example on how to test things, but what would be the next flow?
Well, now we can move on to a fun part, which is actually deploying our checks to our Checkly account. So that way they're running and monitoring our infrastructure. So we can do that using the deploy command. And before we actually deploy, it's useful to actually check what changes are going to occur. So we can do that using the preview flag that you have there.
Nice. And I see that there are now 2 new created resources. So one browser check and API check. Does it mean that the Checkly CLI keeps track of resources?
Exactly. So we're able to create browser checks, API checks, alert channels, and check groups all from the CLI and deploy them to our Checkly account here.
Should I fire it up?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, I'm going to confirm that. And before I do that, for the people watching, this right now is my most favorite part of this entire session. So what we're now doing is we're deploying a new API check and a new browser check, and I'm going to hit Y here right now, and watch out for that. And I press enter now. It is so ridiculously fast that the first time I ran this, I was like, did that work actually? But can we check if that worked?
We can double check it, and I think it did work. But
you're confident. That is good. If you're confident, I'm confident. And let me just change my account. Freaking out for a moment, but we're in the wrong account. Here we go. So it actually did work. What we did is now we deployed some things, but I think we are now ready to go to really look at the nitty-gritty details and see how we can tweak things and configure our monitoring setup. So
Yeah.
Where should we start?
Well, here we see that the checks got created and actually have a tag. So one question is, where does the tag actually come from? And that's here, again, defined in our code base in the Checkly config file. And this is where we set a global config for our project that we're working on for this new monitoring as code JavaScript project that we created. So we need to give our project a name, which is pretty standard. And we also set some default values that will be applied to all of the checks in our project. So these are normal configuration options that are already in our web UI. So we have the locations that our checks will be running on, some tags that will be set for the checks, and a runtime ID.
And these are now propagate really to all the checks that we just deployed. So I could go in here and add a new location. And people watch out, we have TypeScript support, right? You see here that everything is auto-completed. That's one of my favorite things here. But I could now go in here and I could say live session and just hit deploy and let's YOLO it.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. So let's go back. I'm going to apply a force flag here so that I don't have to confirm that all the time. Here we go. That actually looks very, very nice. I love that. But tell me a little bit about the magic that is going on here. We talked already about playwright checks and that they're automatically picked up. How is a Checkly CLI project usually structured, and where's the magic coming from?
Exactly. There's a little bit of magic here, and we can see that in the config file. We define this check match field, which is new, and this is a glob pattern. And this tells the CLI which files it should look for to load tests from. So here it's looking for all the TypeScript files that end in .check.ts. You can also have it look for JavaScript files. And this is loading the API check that we defined earlier. And so the CLI will just go ahead and pick up any files matching this pattern. And we also saw that playwright tests can automatically be converted into browser checks. And that's using this other glob pattern test match. So this is where we can define which playwright tests should be converted into browser checks. You might not want all of the playwright tests in your code base, for example, to be converted into browser checks. So you can really configure here a setup that works for you and your team.
So I could now really just go in here and I could say, okay, let's create a new spec file. And when we now have a look and we copy very, very briefly this quick browser check here, I can pre-check. I'm a big fan of the preview mode, right? I could now pre-check and it will tell us, hey, by the way, there is something new going on here. Do you want to deploy it?
Exactly.
But here's a trick question, my friend. When I look now at the home spec TS file, how would I deploy or how would I define tags, locations, frequencies? I mean, this is not a normal TypeScript file. And how do I do that?
Right. So by default, the browser checks that are created from the playwright file will use the default values that we set in our checkly config file. But this doesn't always work. You might want control over a different location for a particular check or different tags or a different frequency. And so to do this, we can use what we call in monitoring as code constructs. So we saw one earlier with the API check that we created. And this construct is just a normal JavaScript class that we can import from the checkly library. And by creating a new object with it, this will be used to define a check in our checkly account. And so we can go ahead and create browser checks in the same way.
All right, let's do this. So I'm just going to do browser check TS over here. I will copy the construct line. And now assume I find browser checks in here. Here
Exactly.
we go. Nice. So let me just create a new one. And I noticed that there's this little string value for the constructor. What is that about?
So this is called the logical ID. So we need some way to link the check that we're defining in our code base to the check that lives on our checkly account. So that way, whenever we make a change to the check in our code base, we can smartly update the corresponding check in the checkly account, right? We need some way to make this link between the two. And the way that we do this with the checkly CLI is by giving each object a logical ID here. So this just needs to be a string that's unique to our project.
Gotcha. And this then would also allow me to move files around because it really, everything circles around the logical ID. Let's assume I will have a different folder here, which I move this stuff. Doesn't matter where it lives. It's really just the logical ID.
Exactly. When we automatically create the browser checks from a playwright test, we aren't setting a logical ID manually. So there's some limitations there. It's the logical ID will actually be the path of the file. But here, when we're using the constructs, we can set it manually and have complete control. So we're able to move around our code and refactor it and still have our checks in the checkly account be updated in the right way.
That is very, very useful. So TypeScript isn't entirely happy here. So let's satisfy it. So what do we need? I think we need a name. And what else do we need?
Well, we can also import the playwright code that we have. So we can do that using the code field.
Here we go. And it is homepage spec TS. But here's a trick question. Beforehand, the CLI was automatically detecting spec files. Do I now have two browser checks?
We don't. The CLI, since the CLI will detect that we're manually creating a browser check using this file, and it won't go ahead and create a duplicate browser check. So this will let us convert our checks to this new construct format without causing any problems or duplicate checks.
I see. And this is then why we see, so right now we are removing one browser check, which was based on the spec match beforehand. And now we have a new, which is some check. But now I am free also to move this file around wherever I want to have it, because this buddy here is what matters.
Exactly. Using the constructs is really flexible in that way. And now we're actually able to define tags or a different frequency for this check. Whereas before, we could only use the default value for the project.
I see. Shall we deploy it?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Here we go. And I think here we have our first new browser check, and our playwright tests are now running on a schedule. of 10 minutes. But for people that run many checks here, I'm still not very happy with this entire structure, because here we have 2 checks on the root level. Can we clean that up a little?
Yeah, that's true. Let's clean it up. We can use a check group to keep things organized.
And I assume I can just plug away, TypeScript will lead me the way, huh?
That's the nice thing. So we can define checks using the monitoring as code, but we can also define check groups and alert channels and these other resources.
The pattern after, so I've done this a few times, right? But the pattern feels very natural at some point, because you just give an ID, you see what options you have in the JSON object, and then you call it a day. I think that's nice.
Yeah, I agree. We have some docs, but it's nice to just be able to do everything from your IDE without needing to scroll through the docs.
Cool. So let me just set this up. Set some random location over here like this one. But they're not connected yet, no?
Exactly. So now we just created an empty check group, but we'll actually want to put our browser check in it. So the way that we can do this is by assigning a variable for our check group.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just need to pass it to the browser check that we're creating. And the CLI will go ahead and link the two and put our check in the check group.
And the same way, I could now put different resources, so other API checks, other browser checks, into the same group.
Exactly. It would work the same way.
Cool. So let's quickly deploy this. Let's have a look if our little cleanup session actually worked. And I'm in the wrong window. Let's do this. Cool. So the way that you usually would do this, you would probably have a group somewhere in a different file, or maybe, but maybe it's up to you, right? I think it's up to preferences how people want to structure their code.
Exactly. I think if you just have a few checks, it's okay to put everything in one file, but at a certain point, it might get a bit big. And the nice thing about having everything managed as code is you're able to split it up and just import the check group from the file using normal JavaScript.
Yeah, I totally see. But Chris, we are on the finish line already, right? But we are missing one of Checkly's core features. We now have an API check and a browser check running on a schedule, but they're not telling anyone when they're failing. How can I add some alerts over here?
Yeah, let's go ahead and add some alert channels. And we can just do that using the same construct pattern that we had before. And we could go ahead and add an alert channel individually for each check. But another powerful way to set this up is to set default alert channels that applies to all of the checks in our project. And we can go ahead and do that from the Checkly config file.
All right, we're not gonna do PagerDuty or SMS here. We're gonna go old school with an email alert channel. And I have a little snippet prepared, which is important recruits. So this is us. And well, we follow the same pattern, don't we? So here we have our new name, which is the logical ID. And now I can give it, what is it missing? An address. We can do it like this. And we can say, we're leaking our emails here, but I think that's fine. So here we go. And one last thing, we have to connect it the same way as a group.
Exactly.
Here we go. Let's do it like that. Boom. Shall we deploy? Last time? All right, let's have a look at this one. And let's go to our alert section. Indeed, here we are with our newly created alerts. But actually, Chris, I'm still not very, very happy, because when I look here at our Checkly config, I like the way that we have a defined config function, that this is pretty much the general configuration, right? Having like another construct in here and other things, so it feels already like it gets a little bit messy. How can we clean this up?
Well, it's just normal JavaScript, so we can move the alert channels to a separate file and just import that into our config file.
So I could just go in here and could say alerts ps and grab this stuff. And like that, and put it, and then we can call it a day.
Yep, it's that easy. And I really like having the monitoring as code set up like this. We're able to create our email alert channels using a map here over an array. And I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think that having your check set up as code is really powerful. You can create, for example, helper functions to define API checks, and it really lets you structure things in a nice way for your monitoring setup.
I totally agree, right? So sometimes you have long JSON files, or you have some resource definition or component definitions, right? Sometimes you just want to read a file and maybe iterate over it. And this is, for example, where YAML or JSON usually falls short, because you cannot iterate over data with YAML or JSON. And I think that's just a very nice approach, because at the end of the day, as you say, it's just JavaScript, right? Import it, map over it, do something. As long as you call new with the constructs, you're good to go. Exactly.
I really like that about how it turned out.
I agree. But speaking about the new monitoring as code workflow, what is on the roadmap? What's next with our new Checkly CLI?
Well, this is just the beginning, and we're already working on a new set of improvements to make this even better. So we saw earlier with the Checkly test command that we have the output there in our terminal, and we're working on some improvements here. So that way we actually also store the results in the Checkly backend, and then you can view the Checkly test results through our web UI, where we have a nice check result overview page.
Yeah, I can totally see, for example, when I put, so for API checks, probably debugging can be straightforward. I mean, you get it for 400 or 500 different response. And maybe probably you have it in your own log somewhere. But when you control headless Chrome with Playwright, it becomes a little bit more tricky. Why a certain assertion failed, or why didn't reach the UI, the state that I wanted to. So some more debug information there will definitely be super handy and super cool.
Yeah, I think it'll be a nice addition.
Cool. We made it, Chris. Launch day 1. We made it through the demo. Everything worked. Do you want to plug something before I kick you out?
I'd love to plug something. The Checkly CLI that we just demoed here is available on GitHub, so you can see the source code. And if you try it out, we're happy to hear any feature requests that you might have, or if you encounter a bug, you're welcome to open a bug report here on GitHub, and we'll take a look and address it. I'd also like to plug the documentation that we have. Today, we've given a nice walkthrough of how the CLI works, but we also have more in-depth documentation available on our website that goes into the details of how the CLI works. And finally, we have a public roadmap also on GitHub. So if you have any new feature ideas for Checkly, whether they're related to the CLI or not, feel free to open the public roadmap. I know that Tim takes a close look at this, and I think it's fair to say that it plays a big role in the direction of product at Checkly.
We are always looking for feedback, for sure. And Tim, who was on earlier, does a very, very good job on answering and doing thumbs up and asking for more information about specific browser features. I want to point out one thing, though, as it's just JavaScript. You all have seen in the beginning that we had 2 configurations for the Checkly CLI product or project. You can find these in our CLI repository too. So there's also an advanced project where you find, for example, one recommendation or one flow that could work for you, how we group things, how we run our own monitoring as code setup for Checkly. And this can definitely be an inspiration when you get started with the new monitoring as code workflows. And well, Chris, we made it. Thank you very much for joining me today. That was monitoring as code. I have been a blast.
Thanks, Stefan. That was great.
And with this, we had a 40 minutes demo of our new CLI. So let me just do a very, very quick recap. So going forward with the new Checkly CLI, we allow you to code your entire monitoring setup with these new CLI constructs. So you can go ahead, say new browser check, new alert channel, new check group, and then you can go on and you can plug it in your local environment or in your CI/CD workflows using the new Checkly test command. And then when everything is ready to go, and only then you can call npx checkly deploy to update your monitoring setup. And don't do it too early, because when you monitor things, people get alerts, and you don't want to get people out of bed too early. So this is our new monitoring as code workflow. And a little reminder, if you think this is exciting, or if you think it is as exciting as I think it is, you can join our Checkly launch week giveaway. It is available at chkly.co/giveaway. Play around with the CLI, give us a little bit of feedback, and add some GitHub badges to your project. And then you might be the winner of a new fancy keyboard, or I'm personally looking at these new walking pads, so maybe you want to give these a try. Nevertheless, join the giveaway if you want to win something. If you have any questions or feedback, I, Chris, or Tim, we all hang out in our Checkly community, which is available at checklyhq.com/Slack. So this is where we are hanging out. And this was our first day at launch week. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about playwright tests and what it means that we support it natively with Checkly. Then we will have a look at our new public dashboards, our new analytics API, and about SOC 2 Type 2 compliance in the upcoming days. And people, I think this was it for our first launch week day. I had a blast. Thank you, Tim and Chris, for joining here. And we all see each other here tomorrow, same day, same place. Not same day, same time, same place. And I hope you had a lot of fun. See you around.